Welcome all, it's Kirk Cap here. We're going to do a natural edge bowl. And first order of business is to get a hole drilled into it so that I have a good drive point. And that's where I start. Just use a simple spade bit. Drill a little bit of a hole to get through the bark layer and get into solid material. Here I'm showing you driving the drive center in. I would not really recommend to do this on the bed of the lathe, but just for the video purpose I did. I normally do this on the corner of my workbench. Here we're going to make the two highest points. I want them to be at the same plane once I'm done. So that's generally where I start, and then we'll true it up from there, and then we'll go back and check it and get the two high planes together, and then we'll work on the two low planes as we get it turned into a round cylinder. And without using the point in the live center, I can do this very easily. You can move it just a little bit at a time. So it makes it pretty easy and simple way of doing it. If you don't have the cone center, and I would strongly, if you only have a cone center, I would strongly recommend getting one that doesn't have the cone in the middle, or at least a removable point of some sort, so that you can manipulate the piece, so that you can make these easier to do. Because once you get all the high points and low points together in the right fashion, then you can bring the speed up and make the turning a whole lot easier. And you'll end up with a piece that's balanced at the end. So we're still, in this case, we're still working on getting it to the round and getting our points where we need them to be. There's a fair amount of stopping and checking, and for some reason the camera doesn't always like the difference in the colors or something as it spins on this piece, so it likes to try and focus on something other than what it should be, so I apologize for that. All about difference in camera. We just continue on down and get our points and everything where we need them to be before we start shaping. This doesn't really take a very long time to do, so it's well worth the extra little bit of time that it may take you to do this. But it's worth it in the end to have a piece that's balanced. So this is where we go with it. Once again, our camera is not cooperating for some reason there on that. It's probably because of the different colors. But once they're balanced, then we can go start shaping. Get rid of our corner, get the bottom flat, so we know where we're going from as far as a center point and a foot. We'll mark out a tenon here in a second or two, and then we'll shape the outside. This is some cedar. This is some eastern red cedar that I actually got local on my uncle's farm. It is fresh. It is not dry of any sort, of any kind. It's not spraying water, but it is not dry at all. So once we're flat, we can mark a tenon, and then we know where we're going to make our curve from that point to the top. When we scribe our tenon on here, we're only touching with the left hand leg and just match up with the right hand leg visually, because if the right hand leg touches, it's not a very exciting thing, because it will take that right out of your hand, because it'll spin it. Once it digs in, it comes up around and throws it across the room, and hopefully not into your arm or something like that. So you do need to be a little bit careful when you do that. And I always go out on the corner, and I will knock that corner off first. It's just a simple way of getting rid of material in a hurry, and also keeps you from making a bowl that's less than bowl shaped. It's just a matter of get rid of the corner, and we especially doing the natural edge pieces, I always stop the lathe to move the tool rest. Otherwise, you're running the risk of running the tool rest into something you can't see as it's spinning, or worse yet, running your fingers into a piece that's sticking out or something like that. So it's just always good safety practice to not move the tool rest while things are spinning. So we'll continue to shape the piece. As you can see, you can make some pretty nice solid cuts, but we want our curve to go from that foot to the rim in one continuous curve, rather than coming straight out and sort of straight up the wall. So we'll get our base of it curved into where our foot's going to be, establish where the foot is going to be. We already have it marked, and then we will make one continuous curve from that point to the high points on the bowl. This is just how I do it. I mean, there's probably many other ways of doing such a thing. It is wet. You can see on the right hand side there's a little bit of torn grain, but we will get that squared away before we flip it around to do the inside. This piece is going to be turned from wet to finished thickness. I will also sand it while I'm here, because you can sand fairly wet wood, so that once it dries in a couple months from now, all I got to do is go back and probably a little bit of hand sanding and take care of any places that might have raised a grain or something like that. The cedar is a very pretty wood to work with. It is a little bit difficult to work with because it is very soft, and it has a lot of cedar has a lot of aroma to it, because this is the aromatic red cedar. So if you have any kind of allergies to things like that, why, this is probably not a good wood for you to use, because the smell does stick around. This actually, one lonely little piece actually left my shop smelling like cedar for days. So if you don't like the smell of cedar, I wouldn't recommend using it. It is pretty in the end, but it's like a lot of other woods. It will eventually turn brown. The red will turn to a brownish color. Cedar takes a while for it to do it, but it will eventually. That was the sort of a bottom bowl gouge. Clean cut tool was what Trent Bosch would like to call it, which left me a very clean surface to work with. So we'll flip it around, do the inside, and then we'll give it a sand and put it in a paper bag to dry. And we'll get some of the material out of the middle, because we have to have room to work. We're going to leave as much in the middle as what we can. It's just a matter of I start in the middle. I see some people start on the outside edge. This is just where I start. It works for me. There's always things to try on your own. I just keep working my way to the outside, and I'll stop short of the center. And you just keep on, a lot of rinse and repeat. So it's, once again, everything is about practice. So this is really practice. You're constantly picking up a cut, making a cut, coming back up. And I don't pick the tool up to do that. I slide the bevel right back up the wall, and that way I'm in proper alignment with the bevel. So we'll just continue to do that. We can cut the opposite direction at this point to get rid of more material in the bottom if we need to. That way you're using both halves of the bowl gouge rather than using just strictly one half of it. Just saves a little bit of time and a little bit of effort. We're going to stop and check. We can check with our fingers at this point to see whether we're even. as far as the wall thickness goes, or at least what it looks to be even. We'll get our calipers here in a second, and we will set the calipers to a thickness. I think I was originally thinking I would just leave it thick, but then I decided I should just up and finish it to the wall thickness of the finished piece. You can get away with that on some of them. Some of them move too much. It becomes a bit of an issue to try and go back and sand things. But if we sand it wet, then we don't really have to go back and do much sanding. If we can. Some pieces will be too wet to actually sand while they're wet. This one here, for whatever reason, it wasn't the wetness of throwing water. So we were able to go out, and ideally I'm probably looking for about 3/8 of an inch for the wall thickness. I try not to make these too thin because they become sort of fragile. It is kind of fun to do them really thin, but then they become really just a dust collector. We're constantly making room to be able to go down further. So as you see the wall, I think that's where I stopped for the walls. It kind of looks thick on the picture, but it's only about 3/8 of an inch thick. And we'll go down in stages. That keeps the thing from moving so much for you. Because if you were to take the whole thing out and try and come back up to the top, you'll get vibration. Especially if you would have a little bit of a heavy hand and push too hard on the walls, or it moves. So we'll come back up and we'll pick our cut up behind where we stopped, go through the ledge there that was left behind, and go down to where we've cut previously. You can hear it change sound, because I decided I would go back up to the top. It's not really a great way of doing it. You have to have a very, very light touch. No pushing towards the side. You just let the tool cut to the bottom, and you see they got really nice fine shavings, which generally means you got a very clean cut. And we just continue on down to the bottom. Same process, it's just working our way to the bottom. From the top to where I stopped there a second ago, I was using the 40-degree grind, or the 40-40 as some people would like to call it. And now I will switch over to the 60-degree grind, because the 40-degree grind does not like going around the base. It doesn't like when you make the corner and go into end grain. So I'll switch back to the 60-degree, which will allow me to make the proper curve in the bottom. I could also use a bottom bowl gouge at this point if you wanted to, if you have one and like to use one. I think eventually I will use one on the bottom of this. This one actually got a little bit deeper than what I wanted it to be, just by virtue of it didn't cut the material as thin as what or as shallow as what I should. Because the natural edge ones don't really look good if you try and make them deep, smaller in diameter and deeper. I was once told that anything above 50% of the diameter is getting too deep, and you won't get things proportioned. I think this one was very close to being the 50%, but in the end it ended up looking okay. But it just creates a little bit more work to do the bottom inside of it, more so than anything else. And I did not switch over to a bottom bowl gouge, just strictly the 60-degree swept back grind, which works just fine. You just have to pay attention to where your hands are at all the time when you're doing natural edge bowls, because the rim of that is coming around right in front of the tool rest, and you can't, when you're turning, you really can't see it, and you have a tendency, you're not paying attention to where your hand is at. So if you get your hand on the other side of the tool rest, you're going to get smacked. and it does hurt, or draws blood, or all the above. So here is the small bottom bowl gouge or clean cut tool, and it will do a wonderful job on the bottom third of the bowl, or even 2/3 of the bowl. Cuts very cleanly. It's a little different to use because you're so used to using traditional bowl gouges that the flute would be turned over at about 45 degrees, where this one is used pretty much straight up and down, and you're cutting with the bottom of the flute. But it does do a very, very nice job going across the bottom. So my idea is the less sanding I have, the better it is, and that's always my goal. As you can hear, it's starting to vibrate up there if you get up too high on it and put too much pressure on it. And that will leave some wavy lines or something like that in there, which we don't want, because that's more sanding than if you have a little bit of waves or something in there that you needed to get out. I do sand de-spinning. The first go around on the sanding, I usually will just go around the edge without it spinning and make sure that I have that clean, because that's generally where there'll be some more tool marks than anywhere else. But once the outside edge is done, I will sand it just like any other bowl. Just have to keep in mind that when you get out to where the wings are at and it's not a solid surface, that you can't put much pressure on your sanding pad, and you really don't want to put much pressure on it anyhow. But I will sand this complete from, I think I started with 120, either 120 or 150, right up through 800, inside and out. Here, I'll show you that. I do the same thing on the outside. I'll go around that rim, because that's generally where there's going to be things that need sanded more than anywhere else. Because it's rather difficult to get a nice flat surface up in there, unless you can spin it really fast and have a nice light touch. But a lot of times you're in a hurry or whatever, and you don't get the cleanest cut in the world up there. You'll leave some ridges and bumps and things like that. So if I go around just by hand and sand along that edge, then we're generally ready to just sand the whole thing all at one time. Sand right out to the edge. Lighten up the touch when you get out to the edge, and away you go. Once again, we sanded from either 120 or 150 up through 800, and then we will put it in its paper bag to take a nap for, this will probably be dry in 2 months or so in my environment, and then we will be able to do a little bit of final sanding on it. Maybe if we need to, we'll have to shape the foot, so we will have a little bit of work to do down at the foot area. But that foot area, when it comes to that, will be very easy to take care of, because there's less movement down there than there is anywhere else. I put a date on it, and generally what the wood is, I mean, this is not rocket science on this one, but it's just a good practice to get into, is to put the date, the wood, type of wood it is, put it in its, I put it in just a paper bag. This is my drying philosophy. In the paper bag, fold the paper bag over. I will tape the bag shut, and once I tape it shut, I will write that same information on the outside of the bag, or on the, usually try to put it on the tape, because the tape will come off and I can reuse the bag again. But we'll just put the tape on it. I put it over on the shelf in my finished family room, and that's where it sits for whatever period of time it needs to dry. If it's something that's thicker, that's going to need 8-9 months to a year, I'll do the same thing. And I don't mess with them until they're, generally when they're thicker, I won't even mess with them until they're about 8 months old, something like that, 8 to 9 months, and I may get them out of the bag and check them. And at that point, I usually will put them just on the shelf out in the air.